The wind came off the mountains at a slant that morning, and Maya Cole read it the way other people read a clock, without thinking, without needing to be told, just knowing. She was checking the tail rotor of the little observation bird when Colonel Doyle walked past the flight line with 3 visiting officers, and she heard him before she saw him. "That one," Doyle said, and there was a laugh under it. "No, women don't fly combat. She runs the scout ship. Eyes, not teeth." The visiting officers glanced at her. Maya kept her hand flat against the cold aluminum of the tail boom and didn't turn around. She'd heard it before, in different mouths, on different fields. She'd learned that turning around was what they wanted. So she counted the rivets under her palm instead, all 9 of them, and let the sentence go past her like weather. But her jaw did something small and private, and Sergeant Bell, who was fueling the ship beside her, saw it and said nothing, because he'd been on this flight line 11 months, and he'd watched her put that scout bird into places no one else would take a helicopter, and he had a private theory that the colonel had never actually watched her fly. "She's good with the camera," Doyle was saying, walking on. "Best set of eyes on the valley. Just don't put a rifle in her hands and expect miracles." Maya finally spoke, but only to Bell, and only quietly. "Top off the auxiliary tank, too," she said. "Not just the main. We're only scheduled for the North Ridge run. Top it off, anyway." She patted the boom once, the way you'd pat a horse. "Feels like a long tank kind of day." Bell looked at her. She wasn't looking at the mountains the way you look at scenery. She was looking at them the way you look at a road you're going to have to drive in the dark. He topped off the auxiliary tank. "If you're enjoying stories about the people everyone underestimates, do me a favor and subscribe, and tell me in the comments what city you're listening from. I love seeing where you all are. Stay with me all the way to the end, because before this is over, a woman half the size of the men who mocked her is going to bring a burning aircraft down onto a road the width of a kitchen table with 11 people still breathing inside it, and the man who said she couldn't fly is going to be one of them. Stay to the end. You'll want to see his face." The base sat in a high desert bowl ringed by mountains, and the air up there was thin enough that helicopters worked harder for every foot of lift. Maya had learned to fly in air like this, though not here, and not in anything with a government seal on the door. She'd learned in her uncle's crop dusting operation in the Idaho Panhandle, a battered old ship with a sprayer rig bolted underneath, flying so low over the wheat that the wheels sometimes clipped the tops of the stalks. Her Uncle Ray had been a Vietnam pilot who came home and never talked about it, and he'd put her in the left seat at 14 because, he said, she was the only one in the family who didn't yank the controls like she was strangling a chicken. "Light hands," Ray used to say, over and over, until it stopped being words and became something in her wrists. "You don't fly the machine. You suggest things to it. It's already trying to fly. Your whole job is to stop getting in its way." She'd flown that crop duster through box canyons at dawn to beat the wind, threaded it under power lines she could have touched, set it down in fields no wider than a 2-lane road because that was where the strip was, and there wasn't another one. She never thought of it as skill. It was just the job, and the job didn't care that she was small, and the wheat didn't know she was a girl. Ray had one more thing he said, and it wasn't about flying. He said it the day she left for basic, standing by his truck with his hat in his hands. "You keep a log," he told her. Every flight, the bad ones especially. Anybody can remember the day it went right. The pilots who get old are the ones who write down the day it went wrong, so they don't have to learn it twice. She kept the log. She'd kept it for 9 years. It was in her flight bag right now, under the seat of the Scout Bird, a fat green notebook soft at the corners. There was a name in that notebook she hadn't looked at in a long time. Daniel Cole, her brother. 2 years older, the one who'd actually joined up first. The one their mother had been proud of in the loud way, the flags in the yard way. Daniel had flown medevac and gone down in weather over Kandahar 6 years ago, and the last thing Maya had said to him on a scratchy phone line had been something short and stupid about money he owed her. Not, "I love you." Not, "Fly safe." Something about $80. She'd never fixed it. You can't fix it, is the thing. There's no window that stays open. She flew now partly because he had, and she'd never told anyone that, and she never wrote his name in the log, even though the log was where the true things went, because some true things you can't make yourself write down. That was the debt she carried, not money. The $80 was nothing. It was that she'd let the last words be small ones. The visiting officers were gone by mid-morning, and the flight line settled into its rhythm. Maya was on her back under the scout ship's belly with a wrench when Captain Reyes, the maintenance officer, crouched down to hand her a light. "You hear about the tail number on Doyle's ship?" Reyes asked. "No. Chip light's been flickering. Metal in the gearbox oil. They cleared it for the VIP flight anyway, because the brass wanted the dog and pony ride." Maya went still under the ship. A chip light meant the transmission was shedding tiny bits of itself into its own oil. Sometimes it was nothing. Sometimes it was the machine telling you, in the only language it had, that it was about to come apart. "Which ship?" she asked. "The big Black Hawk, 624. Doyle's taking the visiting colonels up over the valley this afternoon. Whole command staff practically. Show them the terrain. Show them the flag." Maya slid out from under the Scout Bird and sat up, wiping her hands. "You flag it?" "I flagged it. Doyle overruled it. Said the light was intermittent and the maintenance crew was being timid." Reyes shrugged, but it wasn't an easy shrug. "It's his call. He's the colonel." Maya looked at the Black Hawk across the ramp, big and confident in the sun, and something moved through her that she didn't have a word for. She thought about the auxiliary tank she'd had Bell fill. She thought about the mountains, and the slant of the wind, and the road she'd been looking at that morning without knowing why. "Feels like a long tank kind of day," she said again, to nobody. The setup for the afternoon flight took over an hour, and Maya watched it from the corner of the maintenance hangar with a cup of coffee gone cold in her hand. Doyle held court on the ramp, and he was good at it. She'd give him that. He walked the visiting colonels around the Black Hawk, slapped its flank, told a story about a night extraction that got bigger every time he told it. The men laughed. He was loud and certain, and he filled a space, and Maya understood, watching him, why people believed him. Certainty is a kind of gravity. It pulls the doubt right out of a room. He saw her watching. He couldn't help himself. "Cole," he called across the ramp, and the visiting officers turned. "Come tell these gentlemen about the scout ship. She takes pretty pictures for us. Don't you, Cole?" "Yes, sir," Maya said, real steady hand on the camera. He was grinning. "We keep her away from the shooting. Safer for everybody, right?" He laughed, and one of the colonels laughed with him, and Maya smiled a small flat smile and said nothing, and the moment passed, and she hated how it sat in her chest like a stone. But then 20 minutes later, something else happened. She was walking back to her scout bird when she passed the crew chief, loading the Black Hawk, a young sergeant named Perez, struggling with a tie-down strap that had jammed in its ratchet. He was sweating and swearing at it. "Here," Maya said, and she took it from him, and without seeming to look, she found the little release the ratchet hid, thumbed it, freed the whole thing in one motion, and handed it back seated and clean. Perez blinked. "How'd you—" "They all jam the same way," she said. "Cold makes the pall stick. You warm the housing with your hand for a second first." She walked on. Perez stood there holding the strap. He'd fought that ratchet for 3 minutes. She'd done it in 3 seconds without breaking stride, and the strange part, the part he couldn't put words to, was that she hadn't even seemed to try. It was like watching water find the low spot in a floor. He didn't know what he'd just seen. He only knew it stuck with him, the ease of it, and he found himself thinking about it later at the worst possible time. There was a third thing, and it was smaller, and it was the reason the men on that flight line would have followed her anywhere. It happened at lunch. The mechanics ate on a bench of ammo crates in the shade of the hangar, and someone got onto the subject of the base commander's new dog, an enormous animal of no identifiable breed that had already eaten a boot, a radio antenna, and most of a folding chair. "That's not a dog," Bell said. "That's a goat with opinions." "It looked at me yesterday," Perez said. "Just looked at me, like it was pricing me out." Maya, without looking up from her sandwich, said, "I heard it filed a grievance with the union." There was a beat, and then the whole bench went. Bell laughed so hard he had to put his food down. She still hadn't looked up. She just took another bite, deadpan, and let them have it. And Perez laughed until his eyes watered. And for a minute, nobody on that bench was thinking about chip lights or VIPs or the long afternoon ahead. That was the thing about her. She could take the tightness out of a group without seeming to do anything at all, and the men loved her for it in a way they never quite said. And it was that easiness, more than any skill, that made them ache later when they thought she was gone. Old Thomas, the fuel handler, saw the last thing, and he was the one who couldn't explain it. He was refilling the Bowser near the scout bird when Maya did her pre-flight walk-around, and he watched her out of the corner of his eye because he liked to watch people work. Most pilots did the walk-around like a chore, a checklist to survive. Maya did it like a conversation. She laid her palm flat on the rotor blades, one at a time, ran it down the length of each, and paused, always paused, at the same spot on the third blade, a hairline the eye couldn't catch, but the hand could. "That one's got a story," Tomas said. "Bird strike 2 years ago. Repaired. It's fine." She patted it. "But it remembers. So I do too." Tomas didn't know what to make of that. He'd worked fuel for 30 years, and he'd never heard a pilot talk about a machine like it had a memory. He only knew that when Maya Cole walked around an aircraft, the aircraft looked, somehow, like it was in better hands than it had been a minute before. He couldn't have told you why. He'd try later, when it mattered, and he wouldn't have the words. And the plainest thing he'd manage would land harder than anything the officers said. The Black Hawk lifted at 1400 hours with 11 souls aboard. Doyle in the left seat, his co-pilot Warrant Officer Kim in the right, Crew Chief Perez in back, and 8 passengers. The 3 visiting colonels, 2 of their aides, a public affairs officer with a camera, the base surgeon Major Ann Foster, who'd asked to come along to survey a possible field hospital site, and Colonel Doyle's own operations officer. Maya was already up. She'd launched the Scout Bird 20 minutes earlier for what was logged as a routine North Ridge photo run, and she was orbiting at 8,000 feet when the Black Hawk climbed out below her and turned up the valley. She keyed her radio. Just to the tower, just routine. Tower, Scout 1, North Ridge, will hold clear of the VIP flight. Scout 1, Tower, Roger. She watched the Black Hawk from above, a fat green shape crawling up the valley floor. And she watched the mountains, and she watched the wind do what she'd known it would do since dawn. It was building. Down low, it was nothing yet, but up along the ridge lines, the snow plumes were starting to stream off the peaks, and that meant the afternoon rotor was setting up, the great invisible tumbling wheel of air that forms on the downwind side of a ridge, and can drop a helicopter 500 feet before the pilot's hand even reaches the collective. Doyle wouldn't feel it yet. Down in the valley, it was smooth. But he was flying toward the ridge, and the ridge was where the trouble lived. Maya keyed her mic to switch to the command frequency, some instinct telling her to warn them, and that was the moment the Black Hawk's chip light became a scream. 11, she thought. 11 people on that ship. She heard it happen over the command net because Kim, the co-pilot, was already talking fast. Mayday! Mayday! 624. We've got a transmission chip light and a pressure drop. We are. Stand by. We've got vibration. Heavy vibration. We're losing the main gearbox. Maya was already turning, not thinking about it. The Scout Bird came around and dropped its nose, and she poured altitude into speed. And below her, the Black Hawk began to yaw, its tail swinging, the first sign that the transmission was failing, and taking the tail rotor's drive with it. Down on the base, in the tower, in the maintenance hangar, on the fuel line, people stopped moving. The Mayday went out over every speaker tuned to command, and Bell heard it, and Perez's name was on that ship, and Thomas heard it, and set down his fuel nozzle very slowly, and Reyes heard it, and put his hand over his mouth. And Colonel Doyle's voice came on, and it was not the loud voice from the ramp. It was a smaller voice, a stripped voice, a man reading the ground rushing up at him. "We are going down," Doyle said. "We are going down. We've lost the tail. I can't hold heading. We are—" Then the Black Hawk hit the worst of the rotor, coming off the ridge, and it dropped. Maya watched it fall out of the sky like a thing with its strings cut, 400 feet in a breath. And she heard the passengers now. An open mic somewhere in the back, the sound a group of people make when the floor leaves. The Black Hawk didn't crash. That was the mercy and the curse of it. Doyle was a good enough pilot to keep it from simply spinning into the rocks. He got the nose down, traded the fall for forward speed, and found the one flat thing in a landscape made of teeth. A road. An old mining road, cut into the side of the valley, red dirt and gravel, wide enough for one truck and no more, running along a shelf with a rock wall rising on one side and a drop falling away on the other. It was the only flat ground for 2 miles in any direction, and Doyle put the crippled Black Hawk down on it hard skidding, one skid catching the rock wall and spinning the tail, and the ship came to rest wedged across the road at an angle, canted over, one door crushed against the rock and the other hanging over the drop. And then it caught fire. Not all at once. A fuel line, cracked in the impact, began to feed a small flame at the base of the engine cowling. And the small flame was patient, and it started to grow. Maya saw all of this from 2,000 feet as she came down the valley, and she did the math without meaning to. The ship was down, but burning. The doors were blocked, one by the rock, one by the drop. There were 11 people inside a machine that was on fire, on a road too narrow for any rescue helicopter in the fleet to land beside it, because the fleet flew Black Hawks and Chinooks, machines with rotor spans of 50 and 60 feet. And that shelf of road was maybe 30 feet wide before the rock on one side and the emptiness on the other. Nothing in the inventory could land there. Nothing but a small ship, a scout ship, a machine flown by someone with light hands who'd spent a childhood setting a crop duster down on strips no wider than a road. She keyed the command net. All stations, Scout 1. I have the crash site in sight. 624 is down and burning on the old mine road. Grid to follow. Doors are blocked. It's too tight for a Hawk to land beside them. She took one breath. I'm going in with the scout. The net was silent for a second. Then a voice she didn't expect. The Base Operations Center. And behind the controller's voice, another voice, older, that she realized was Doyle's boss, Brigadier General Hale, the man who ran the whole installation, the man who 2 months ago had signed off on keeping her in the scout ship and out of everything else. Scout 1, this is Hale. A pause, and in the pause was a whole argument he was having with himself. That road won't take a landing. It'll take mine, sir. Cole. He stopped. She heard him decide. She heard it cost him. I was told you weren't rated for... He cut himself off. That was wrong. That was my mistake, and I own it. You're the only aircraft that can reach them. Go. Go now. Whatever you need, it's yours. Roger, Maya said. Scout 1 inbound. And that was the first time all day her voice went out over the net as the pilot and everyone who'd spent the morning hearing about the girl with the camera heard something in it that didn't match the story they'd been told. The problem was not the landing. Maya knew she could land. The problem was the wind, and the fire, and the geometry. And she worked all three in the 90 seconds she had before she reached the site. Because 90 seconds was all the fire would give her. The wind was the killer. That same rotor off the ridge that had knocked the Black Hawk down was still there, still tumbling, and it ran right across the road she needed to land on. If she came in the obvious way, up the valley and into the wind like every landing she'd ever been taught, the rotor would catch her at the worst moment, in the last 20 feet, when she was slow and low and had nothing left to trade, and it would slap her scout ship into the rock wall or over the edge, and then there'd be 2 burning aircraft on that road instead of 1. She could not land into the wind. But you cannot land a helicopter with the wind behind you either. A tailwind steals your lift exactly when you need it most. She had one thing. She had the shape of the ground. The road ran along a shelf, and below the shelf, the valley wall dropped away steep and rocky for 300 feet to the valley floor. And Maya, who had flown a crop duster along 1,000 ridgelines, knew something about a steep slope with wind pouring over the top of it. She knew that when wind comes over a ridge and spills down a steep face, it doesn't all tumble into rotor. Right at the surface, hugging the rock, in the last few feet before the ground, there's a thin skin of air that does the opposite. It slides down the slope smooth and steady, a laminar sheet, because the ground forces it to. Pilots called it the slope wind. Her uncle called it the good air. Under the bad air. The rotor's up high, she said aloud, to herself, to the empty cockpit, working it through the way Ray had taught her to work a problem out loud, so your hands could hear the plan. The rotor's up at 50 feet, 100 feet. That's where it'll kill me. But down low, right on the deck, right against that slope, the wind's not tumbling down there. It's sliding. It's smooth, if I stay under it. If I come in low enough to touch the tops of the scrub, and I ride that slope, wind right up the face of the valley, and onto the road, I never go up into the rotor at all. I stay in the good air the whole way. It meant flying the last half mile at 15 feet off a rising rocky slope, in a crippled wind, threading up a mountainside below the level of the disturbed air, and arriving at the road already at road height with the smooth air carrying her in. It meant no margin. It meant if she was 5 feet too high, she was in the rotor and dead. And if she was 5 feet too low, she was in the rocks and dead. And the road it delivered her to had a burning aircraft on it, and a rock wall on one side, and 300 feet of nothing on the other. It was exactly, precisely, the kind of flying her uncle's fields had taught her, and no flight school ever would. She dropped down onto the slope. The scrub tops flickered under her skids, close enough to touch. The scout bird bucked once as she left the tumbling air above and settled into the thin, smooth sheet sliding down the rock. And then she felt it, the way you feel a car's wheels find dry pavement after ice. The air went silk. Ray's good air. It was there, exactly where the mountain said it would be. She rode it up the face of the valley, 15 feet off the rock, the engine screaming in the thin, high desert air, her light hands making 100 corrections, a second that she wasn't aware of making. The road rushed at her. The burning Black Hawk sat across it. She had maybe 40 feet of clear road on the near side of the wreck, 40 feet between the edge of the drop and the rock wall and the fire, and she brought the scout ship up over the lip of the shelf, still in the smooth air, and set it down on the red dirt so lightly the dust barely rose. She was on the road. She was down. Now she had to get 11 people out of a burning aircraft, and she was one person, and she was small, and the doors were blocked. She'd been on the ground 4 seconds when Perez appeared at the crushed door. He'd been the only one still loose in the back, the crew chief, unbuckled to help the passengers, and when the ship hit, he'd been thrown clear of his seat and half out the door that hung over the drop. He was hanging there now, one arm hooked inside, and he saw the scout ship land, and he screamed over the fire. "Cole, the door's jammed, the handle's sheared, they're all still strapped in." She was already moving. She left the scout ship running. You don't shut down in a spot like that. You keep the engine turning in case you have to move it fast. And she came around the front of the Black Hawk low, under the swinging dead rotor, to the door crushed against the rock wall. The door handle had sheared off in the impact. The internal release was mangled. The passengers were belted into their seats in a cabin filling with smoke, canted over at 30 degrees, and the fire was walking up the far side toward the fuel. And Maya Cole stopped for 1/2 second and did the thing that Perez would talk about for the rest of his life. She didn't pull at the broken handle. She'd seen it was broken from 6 feet away. Instead, she dropped to one knee at the base of the door, where the crash had sprung the lower hinge, put her small shoulder into the exact spot where the metal had already begun to fail, and drove upward with her legs that had spent 9 years working rudder pedals, and the whole panel groaned and folded outward off its ruined hinge, and the door came away. They warm the housing first, Perez said, or thought, or both. The pal sticks in the cold. She'd told him that about the strap. She found the spot that was already failing, and she helped it fail the rest of the way. She didn't fight the metal. She suggested things to it. It was already trying to break. Her whole job was to point it the right direction. The door came free, and the smoke rolled out, and Maya went into the burning aircraft. "Foster!" she shouted, because she'd seen the passenger manifest, because she knew the base surgeon was aboard, and a doctor was worth 10 hands in the next 4 minutes. "Ann Foster, are you conscious?" "Here." A cough from the middle of the cabin. "I'm here. I'm pinned. My legs caught under the seat frame." Maya reached her through the smoke. Major Ann Foster, 44 years old, base surgeon, mother of a daughter in her first year of college, who Foster had been texting from the flight line an hour ago about the cost of textbooks. An ordinary, unfinished human thing, a mother and a kid, and a bill for textbooks, was folded into the buckled cabin with the seat frame across her shin. "Am I going to die in here?" Foster asked. She asked it plainly, the way a doctor asks, because a doctor knows the honest ones live longer. "Tell me straight. I don't want a pep talk. Am I getting out of this?" Maya got her hands under the seat frame. She looked Foster in the eye through the smoke. "You're getting out," Maya said. "I flew a crop duster onto worse roads than this since I was 14. That part's done. You're already out. We just have to walk you to it." Not, I think. Not, I hope. A fact, handed over like a tool. And then the hands that had held the collective featherlight through the slope wind, the hands with 9 years of light touch in them, got hard and careful all at once, and she braced her back against the seat frame and lifted, not a jerk, a steady rising pressure, the way you'd lift something you couldn't afford to drop. And the frame came up 2 inches, and Foster dragged her leg free, and Maya had her up and moving toward the light. The others were belted in, and most were conscious, and Maya went down the line by feel, and by shouting, releasing buckles, pulling the dazed toward the door, handing them out to Perez, who'd stopped hanging over the drop and was now hauling bodies onto the road, the public affairs officer, bleeding from the scalp, the 2 aides, one of the visiting colonels with a broken wrist held against his chest, Doyle's operations officer, unconscious, dead weight, and Maya got a strap around his chest and dragged him foot by foot while the fire climbed. Down to the cockpit. Kim, the co-pilot, was already free, kicking out the shattered windscreen and crawling onto the nose. That left one. Doyle. He was still in the left seat. His side of the aircraft was the side against the rock, the side the fire had reached first, and his door was gone into the rock, and his legs were pinned under the collapsed instrument panel, and the flames were coming across the center console toward him. And Colonel Doyle, who that morning had told 3 visiting officers that women don't fly combat, was trapped in a burning aircraft, waiting to find out who was going to come through the smoke for him. It was Maya. Down on the base, they could only listen. The whole thing had gone out over the open net because Perez's radio was keyed and jammed against a seat, and every soul on that installation stood frozen around a speaker, listening to a woman's voice work through smoke and fire. And there came a moment, General Hale would describe it later, in a room full of people, and his voice would not be steady. When the fire reached the cockpit, and Doyle's own voice came over the net, and the loud man was gone entirely, and what was left was just a person, and he said the thing that cost him everything he was. He said, "Cole, Maya, I need you. I'm stuck, and I need you to come get me. Please, I'm sorry, come get me." 4 seconds of nothing on the net. Everyone listening counted them. 4 seconds where the only sound was the fire. And then Maya's voice, flat, close, already there. "I've got you. Stop talking. Save your air." She'd never left. She was already at his door. The panel across Doyle's legs was steel, and it was bent down over his thighs, and there was no lifting it with her back the way she'd lifted the seat frame off Foster. She had seconds. The fire was across the console. She could feel it on the side of her face. And this is the part Maya would never fully explain, because it happened below the level of thought, in the place where 9 years of a thing lives in the body. She didn't try to lift the panel. She'd already seen she couldn't. Instead, she looked at how it was bent, down and forward, hinged at the firewall. And she understood that a thing bent one way will move the way it's already going far easier than any other direction. The same truth as the door. The same truth as the ratchet. The same truth as the crop duster. She never fought and only ever suggested things too. She braced both boots on the seat frame, got both hands under the leading edge of the panel where it had already started to fold, and instead of lifting, she pushed it forward, the way it was already bent, rolling it down and away off his legs along the path the crash had started. It went. It groaned and rolled forward, and Doyle's legs came free, and Maya had her arms under his, and she pulled, boots slipping in the smoke, this small woman dragging a large man up out of a burning cockpit. And the flames took the seat they'd both just left as they cleared it. She got him through the sheared windscreen and onto the nose and down onto the road, and Perez took his weight, and Maya came out last, coughing, her eyebrows singed, and stood up on that narrow red road with the fire finishing the Black Hawk behind her, and 11 people alive on the ground in front of her. 11. She keyed her radio. Her voice, when it came, was the most boring sound in the world, and that was the terror and the glory of it. "Base, Scout 1. All 11 are out of 624. Requesting medevac to the mine road. One flat spot, I'll mark it. Be advised the road's tight. Send the small ships." A pause, a cough. "Foster's got a lower leg injury. One unconscious, one broken wrist. The rest are walking. Sights secure. Scout 1 standing by." That was all. She reported 11 people pulled from a burning aircraft the way you'd report the weather. Nobody who heard it ever forgot the flatness of it. She sat down on the red dirt then, next to Doyle, because her legs had decided the standing part was over. And she looked at her own hands, and they were shaking now, both of them, the fine tremor of a body that had spent every drop of what it had. She made a fist to stop it. It didn't stop. She put the hand under her arm and looked at the mountains instead. Perez was going down the line of survivors, counting heads out loud. 9, 10, 11. And when he got to 11, his voice broke on the number, and he had to say it again to believe it. The medevac came 20 minutes later. 2 small observation ships, the only things that could get in, flown by pilots who'd spent the morning being briefed by radio on how to do exactly what Maya had already done from memory. They ferried the survivors off the mine road 2 at a time. Foster went out on the first ship. Before they loaded her, she caught Maya's sleeve. "You said a fact," Foster said. "In there, not a hope, a fact." She was gray with pain, and she was a surgeon, and she knew the difference. "How do you know it was true?" "I didn't know it was true," Maya said. "I knew I was going to make it true. That's different. You decide it's a fact, and then you spend everything making the world agree." Foster looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "My daughter's going to want to meet you," and they loaded her onto the ship. The investigation started before Maya had even washed the smoke off. A colonel named Prentice flew in from the regional command the next morning, a safety investigation officer, a careful, humorless man whose job was to reconcile paperwork with reality, and reality had just handed him a stack of paperwork that made no sense. He sat up in a borrowed office with Maya's file open on the desk, and Maya in the chair across from him, and he was not hostile, but he was baffled. And baffled men ask hard questions. "Chief Warrant Officer Cole," he tapped the file. "Your record says scout and reconnaissance, photo runs, observation. It says, and I'm quoting your last 3 evaluations, suited to low-intensity survey tasking." "Yes, sir." "There is nothing in this file, nothing, that says you can put a rotor craft onto a 30-foot mountain road in rotor wind conditions that a safety board would have called unflyable." He looked up. "Help me understand how the file and the event are the same person." "The file's not wrong, sir," Maya said. "It just wrote down the wrong things." "Explain that." "The file wrote down what I was assigned. It didn't write down what I could do, because nobody ever asked me to do it, so it never happened where anyone could log it." She met his eyes. "You can't evaluate what you won't task. I've been landing on roads like that my whole life. It's just that, until yesterday, on paper, I'd never landed on one. So on paper, I couldn't." Prentice sat back. He was quiet for a while. "Where'd you learn it?" he asked finally. "Crop dusting. Idaho. My uncle." She almost smiled. "The FAA has strong feelings about some of the fields I've used. None of it's in your file either." Prentice looked at the file, and then at her, and he closed the file. That was the thing Maya remembered. He closed it like it had stopped being the source of truth, and the source of truth was now sitting in the chair. "I'm going to write this up," he said, "and every officer who reads it is going to think I made it up. You understand that? The event is less believable than the paperwork." He shook his head slowly. "I've been doing this 19 years. I've never had the record be the underestimate. It's always the other way around." "Sir," Maya said, "if it makes it easier, you can write down that I had a lot of help from the mountain." He didn't laugh, but something in his face let go. "Get some rest, Chief. You've earned about a month of it." The base at night went quiet, and Maya couldn't sleep, and neither could Ann Foster, and they found each other in the dim mess hall at 2 in the morning, Foster with her leg and Cass propped on a chair, Maya with a mug of tea gone cold, and they talked the way people talk only in the dark after something like that. "I keep doing it again," Foster said. "The seat frame on my leg, every time I close my eyes. The smoke. Yeah. Does it stop?" "Some of it." Maya turned the cold mug in her hands. Some of it you just make room for. Foster watched her. You're not sleeping either. No. What's yours? What do you see when you close your eyes? Foster asked it as a doctor, gently, but Maya didn't answer the way you answer a doctor. She answered the way you answer at 2 a.m. when the thing has been sitting in your chest for 6 years. My brother, Maya said. Daniel. He flew medevac. Went down in weather over Kandahar 6 years ago. She looked at the table. Last time I talked to him, I was mad about $80 he owed me. That was it. That was the last thing. $80. Her jaw did the small private thing. I've flown 10,000 hours since then, and I've never once said out loud that the reason I fly is him. I couldn't even write his name in my logbook, and I write everything in that logbook. The mess hall hummed. Somewhere, a refrigerator cycled on. You want to know the thing I've never told anyone, Maya said. Yesterday, in that cockpit, going up the slope in the good air, the thought I had wasn't about the 11 people. It was, Daniel would have turned around too. Same stupid, impossible turn. And for about 4 seconds, I wasn't flying that mountain for the colonels. I was flying it for him. And I hate that. I hate that I needed 11 strangers on fire to feel close to my own brother. Foster was quiet. Then she said the thing Maya couldn't say to herself. You didn't need them on fire, Foster said. You've been flying for him for 6 years. Yesterday was just the first day it was loud enough for you to hear it. She leaned forward. Maya, the $80 wasn't the last thing you said to him. It was the last thing you said with your mouth. You've been saying the real thing with your hands. For 6 years, 10,000 hours of it. He heard you. Wherever that kind of thing goes, he heard all 10,000 hours. Maya put her hand over her eyes. Her shoulders went once hard, and she made a sound she'd been not making for 6 years, and Foster didn't touch her, just sat with her leg in its cast, and let the woman who'd carried her out of a fire finally put something down. Okay, Maya said, after a while, wet and furious and steadier. Okay, yeah, I'm going to write his name in the log, Maya said. When I get back to the barracks, I'm going to write it down. Good, Foster said. Write down the day it went wrong, so you don't have to learn it twice. Maya looked up sharply, because those were almost Ray's words, and Foster couldn't have known that. And for a second, the whole dark room felt like it had a door open in it, somewhere to somewhere else. She wrote his name that night, Daniel Cole, and under it, 4 words, I fly for you. The first thing in 9 years of that logbook that wasn't a fact about an aircraft. It was a fact about her. The question of what to do about Doyle answered itself, and it answered itself through Maya, which was the only way it could have, because 2 days after the crash, the review board convened to assess the transmission failure, and the finding that mattered was going to be about that chip light, the one Reyes had flagged and Doyle had overruled. That overrule had nearly killed 11 people. It was, in the plainest terms, the kind of thing that ends a command. Reyes had documented it. The paper was airtight. Doyle was finished, and everyone knew it. And there was a part of Maya that had spent a morning being called the girl with the camera and would not have been sorry to watch it happen. They asked Maya to give a statement about the airworthiness of the aircraft because she'd talked to Reyes before the flight, because she'd known about the chip light too. She sat with the question for a long time. Nobody handed her the answer. There was no witness who came forward, no document that surfaced, no clever insight from a stranger. There was just Maya, alone with what she knew and what she decided a person was. And what she knew was this: the chip light had been intermittent, and Doyle's read of it, that the maintenance crew was being cautious, had been wrong, catastrophically wrong. But it had not been reckless in the way the paper would make it sound. 100 pilots had flown 100 intermittent chip lights. Most of the time, it was nothing. Doyle had bet the way most people bet and lost the way almost nobody loses. That wasn't innocence, but it wasn't the crime the paperwork was about to make it. She could stay silent and let the paper do its work. Or she could tell the truth, the whole shape of it, which would not save Doyle's command, but would keep it from being buried under him like a stone. She told the truth. She wrote a statement that said the chip light was genuinely intermittent, that the decision was a bad one, but a common one, that the maintenance officer had done everything right, and the command had erred, but not out of malice. It was the fairest possible account, and it was fair to a man who had humiliated her in front of visiting officers the very morning he nearly died, and she wrote it because Ray had taught her a thing that had nothing to do with flying. You name your own failures before anyone else can, and you extend to the other person the exact accounting you'd want extended to you, especially when you don't feel like it. Especially then. Doyle lost his command anyway. You can't overrule a chip light and put 11 people in a fire and keep a command. But because of Maya's statement, he kept his wings, and he kept his record clean enough to fly again somewhere, someday, and he knew, everyone knew, that the person who'd handed him that mercy was the one he'd called the girl with the camera. He came to find her before he transferred out. It was in the maintenance hangar, evening, Maya cleaning the Scout Bird's windscreen of 2 days of red dust, and Doyle stood at the edge of the light for a while before he spoke, and when he spoke, it came out broken and started over twice. I wanted to... He stopped. I read your statement. You didn't have to... He stopped again. His hands were doing something at his sides. I've been trying for 2 days to figure out how to say this, and there isn't a way that isn't small. I was wrong about you. Not just wrong. I said things in front of people about you, and then you came into the fire and got me out with your own 2 hands after I said them. His voice cracked, and he let it. There's no version of sorry that's the right size for that, but I'm saying it. I'm sorry, Maya. I was a fool, and you saved my life, and those 2 things are both just true. Maya set down the rag. She looked at him for a moment. You called me by my name on the radio, she said. In the fire. Maya, not Cole. She picked the rag back up. Lead with that one next time. It's the one you got right. It wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't a punishment. It was a fact handed over, like a tool, and Doyle took it and nodded and walked out of the hangar. And something in the set of his shoulders was different than it had ever been on that ramp. Ann Foster's daughter came to the base 3 weeks later. Her name was Grace, and she was 19, and she'd driven 11 hours from her college the moment her mother could have visitors. And she found Maya on the flight line because Foster had told her exactly where to look. She didn't have any military words. She didn't know how to salute or what a chip light was, or why a road being 30 feet wide mattered. She just walked up to the small woman by the scout ship, this girl with her mother's eyes, and she stood there with her hands opening and closing, and then she said the thing, and it had no vocabulary in it at all. "You're the one," Grace said. "You're the one who—" And she couldn't finish it either. None of them could ever finish the sentences. And she just stepped forward and put her arms around Maya and held on and said into her shoulder, she was going to miss my graduation. That's all I kept thinking when they called me. She was going to miss it, and I was so mad about the textbook money, and that was going to be the— Maya went very still, because there it was, the $80. The last small thing that almost becomes the last thing. This girl had been fighting with her mother about textbook money, the way Maya had fought with Daniel about $80, and the fire had almost frozen it there forever. And it hadn't, because of a road and a slope wind and a pair of light hands. "You're not going to miss anything," Maya said, and her voice wasn't quite steady. "She's going to be at your graduation, front row. You're going to be embarrassed by how loud she is." Grace laughed and cried at the same time. Maya held on to her and did not know how to receive the size of the thing she was being handed. This whole life, this mother and daughter, and a graduation that was going to happen now. And she looked over Grace's shoulder at the mountains and thought about writing a name in a logbook. The recognition came at a formation 2 months later, and it was General Hale who ran it, and he did the thing that cost him. He stood up in front of the assembled personnel of the installation, the same man who had signed the evaluation that called her suited to low-intensity survey tasking, and he did not read a citation and hide behind it. He put the paper down. "I'm supposed to read this award," Hale said. "I'm going to in a minute. But first, I'm going to tell you what I did, because if I don't say it out loud, then the award is a lie." The formation was silent. 2 months ago, if you'd asked me who my best pilots were, I wouldn't have said her name. I'd read her file. I'd signed her evaluations. I put her in a scout ship, and I kept her there. And I told myself it was about tasking, and it wasn't. It was about what I assumed when I looked at her. He was not comfortable. He made himself keep going. And then 11 people were on fire, on a road that nothing in my fleet could land on. And the pilot I'd underestimated flew up the side of a mountain in wind that should have killed her and landed on that road and pulled all 11 out with her own hands. And one of them was the colonel, who'd called her the girl with the camera that same morning. He picked the paper back up. "I was wrong about her. I'm the general, and I was wrong, and I'm saying it in front of all of you because you deserve to know your commander can be that wrong, and because she deserves to have it said where everyone can hear it, since the other thing got said where everyone could hear it too." And then he read the citation and pinned the award, and Maya stood at attention and barely moved, and it was the room that moved. It was Perez who stood first, before the applause was even sanctioned. The crew chief who'd watched her free a jammed strap in 3 seconds and then watched her tear a door off a burning aircraft. And he came to his feet with his eyes wet. And then Reyes stood. And then the whole line of mechanics from the flight line. The men who'd eaten sandwiches on ammo crates and laughed at her joke about the dog. And then the formation, and the sound of it filled the desert bowl. And in the third row, a large man who'd lost a command and kept his wings stood up straighter than anyone. And Colonel Doyle looked at the small woman at the front and could not look away, and did not try to. Thomas, the old fuel handler, was there too, at the back, and afterward a young airman asked him what all the fuss was about. And Thomas, who'd spent 30 years around aircraft and never had the words, finally found them. And they were the plainest words anybody said about Maya Cole in the whole business. "That little one," Thomas said, watching her walk back toward the flight line, while the formation broke up around her. "She don't fly the helicopter." He searched for it. "The helicopter flies better because she's in it. I seen a lot of pilots. Never seen that but the once." That was all he had. It was enough. It was more than the general's whole speech. A year later, the mine road had a name. Not officially, the maps still called it what they'd always called it, but the pilots on that base called it Cole's Shelf. And more than that, there was a thing in the flight operations manual now, a new page, a procedure for slope wind approaches to confined areas that hadn't existed before, written up by a safety officer named Prentice, who'd once closed a file in an office because the person was truer than the paper. The procedure didn't have her name on it. Procedures don't. But every new pilot who came to that base learned the good air under the bad air, learned to ride the smooth sheet up a steep slope below the rotor, and none of them knew it had a woman's fingerprints on it. And that was exactly the kind of legacy Maya would have chosen if anyone had asked her, which nobody did, because she'd never have said it out loud. Ann Foster made her daughter's graduation, front row, embarrassingly loud, exactly as promised. And there's a photograph of the two of them from that day that Foster keeps on her desk in the base hospital where she still works, and next to it, smaller, is a photograph of a scout helicopter, which visitors never understand and which she never explains. Perez made warrant officer and started flight training. He wanted to fly the small ships. When they asked him why on the form, he wrote something the board didn't understand and didn't question. "Because I watched somebody do the impossible in one and make it look like she was doing me a favor." And Maya Cole kept flying. There was one thing the fire left her, and she never named it, and the people close to her learned not to name it either. It was her left hand. In the cold, in the high desert mornings, when the temperature dropped, the hand she'd braced against a burning panel didn't close all the way anymore, and there was a stiffness in it that a cold pre-flight walk-around brought up sharp. She never mentioned it. She just started warming that hand in her armpit before she touched the controls on cold mornings, a small private motion, the way she'd once told Perez to warm a housing before a ratchet would give. On a winter morning a year and some months after the crash, she was doing her walk-around on the Scout Bird in the thin cold light, laying her palm flat on each rotor blade the way she always had. And when she got to the third blade, she paused, at the hairline the eye couldn't catch, and she flexed her stiff left hand once inside the warmth of her jacket before she reached up to touch it. "You remember," she said quietly to the blade, "the bird strike, the old repair. So I do too." Then she climbed up into the scout ship, the same kind of machine they'd once used to keep her small, the machine that turned out to be the only thing on the whole base that could reach 11 people on fire. And she ran her hands over the controls. Light, suggesting things to it, and the engine caught. And she lifted off the flight line into a cold, clear morning with the mountains ahead of her, and the good air waiting under the bad, level-eyed, small in the seat, exactly where she was supposed to be. She flew for Daniel. It was written in the log now, so it was true. And she flew, though she'd never once say it this way, for everyone who'd ever been looked at and measured small, every one of them, if they only knew it. Riding lighter through the world because a woman nobody bothered to task once flew up the side of a mountain. Nobody could fly, and never told a soul it cost her anything at all.